There's a specific sound a body makes hitting gravel from 10 feet up, and I will hear it for the rest of my life. Not loud, not the way you'd imagine, just a single flat thud and then the immediate, total silence of 30 people forgetting how to breathe at once. My name is Harper, I'm 34, and 8 weeks before that sound, I was the happiest I'd been in years. I need to back up, because none of what happened on that terrace makes sense without understanding what came before it, the version of my life where I still believed good news, delivered honestly, to the right people, in the right way, could fix almost anything. I'm a labor and delivery nurse. 12 years now, at a hospital outside Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of job that teaches you to read a room fast, vitals, body language, the gap between what someone says and what their face is actually doing. I'd married Adam Whitlock almost 2 years earlier, and for almost 2 of those years, I had been trying, in every quiet way I knew how, to be accepted by his family. That had never come easily. The Whitlocks were old Asheville money, a family trust worth $10 million, built 3 generations back and guarded since by people who had learned, the hard way, that money disappears the moment you stop watching it closely. Patricia, my mother-in-law, 62, had watched it more closely than anyone. She ran every conversation in that family like a closed-door meeting, and from the very first dinner I'd attended at her house, I'd understood, without anyone saying it directly, that I was an item still under review. I had a plan, though, the kind of plan that felt foolproof in the bright, hopeful logic of early pregnancy. We would tell them at Patricia's 60th birthday dinner, 30 guests, white tablecloths on the terrace of the Grove Park Country Club, the whole extended family gathered in one place for the first time in years. Adam thought it was the right moment. I thought so too. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror that morning, my hand resting flat against a stomach that didn't look like anything yet, and feeling something I hadn't let myself feel around that family before, certain. I didn't yet understand that certainty, in that family, was exactly the kind of thing Patricia had spent her whole life learning to be suspicious of. Brooke, my sister-in-law, found me in the kitchen an hour before the dinner, refilling water glasses I didn't need to refill, the kind of busy work I'd learned does for nervous hands what nothing else quite does. "You look like you're about to do something," she said, watching me a beat too long. "You always know how to make an entrance, Harper." I laughed it off. I told her I was just excited for her mother's birthday. I didn't think, in that moment, to ask myself why the comment had landed the way it did, small, oddly precise, like she already knew the shape of something I hadn't told anyone yet. I want you to hold on to that moment, because it's the first thread in a story that took me months to fully understand. By the time I understood it, I was 8 months pregnant, mid-divorce, and sitting across a conference table from my mother-in-law's attorney with enough evidence in a single folder to end the life she'd spent 62 years protecting. But that night, on the terrace, all I had was hope, a sonogram printed on glossy paper folded inside my purse, and absolutely no idea that within 2 hours, my mother-in-law would stand up in front of 30 of her closest friends and accuse me, in front of everyone, of faking a pregnancy to steal her family's money, and that what came after her accusation would put me in an emergency room with a broken wrist and a baby whose heartbeat the doctors would have to find twice before anyone in that room exhaled. The cold treatment had started almost the moment Adam put a ring on my finger, though it took me longer than it should have to recognize it as cold rather than simply reserved. Patricia wasn't the kind of mother-in-law who said cruel things directly. She was the kind who complimented my dress at our engagement party and then, in the same breath, asked Adam if I understood what marrying into a family like this actually required. I didn't understand it yet. I understood, instead, the version Adam had given me, a mother who loved fiercely and worried constantly, who'd built her entire identity around protecting a trust fund that had nearly disappeared once, decades ago. Under circumstances nobody in the family discussed in any detail. "She'll come around," Adam told me, more times than I can count, in the easy, hopeful tone of a man who genuinely believed his mother's approval was simply a matter of time and patience. "She's like this with everyone at first." I believed him. I think, looking back, I wanted to believe him more than the evidence in front of me actually supported, not because I was naive, but because I'd spent my whole adult life choosing hope over suspicion whenever I had the option. And that habit had served me well in most other parts of my life. It hadn't yet been tested against someone like Patricia. The prenuptial agreement came up exactly once, the week before our wedding, in a conversation so brief I almost forgot it had happened at all. Joan Reyes, my own family's longtime attorney, had drafted it at my insistence, not Adam's family's insistence, mine. I wanted it clear, in writing, signed and notarized, that I had no claim to the Whitlock Trust under any circumstance, divorce or otherwise. Adam had been faintly embarrassed by the suggestion, as though I were accusing his family of something. "You really don't need to do this," he'd said. "Nobody's worried about that." I did it anyway. I told him it was about protecting both of us, which was true, though I think some smaller, more private part of me had also wanted it as proof, not for Adam, but for myself, that I'd married him for reasons that had nothing to do with the number attached to his last name. I had no idea, signing that document in Joan's office on a Tuesday afternoon, that I was creating the single most important piece of evidence in a case I wouldn't know I needed to build for another 2 years. Adam's financial dependence on his mother revealed itself slowly, the way most uncomfortable truths do, not in one dramatic confession, but in 100 small moments I noticed and, for a long time, chose not to add together. He didn't have a salary of his own. Not really. He worked, nominally, for the family's investment office, but his actual income came through disbursements Patricia approved personally, on a schedule she controlled entirely. I watched him ask her permission for things a 36-year-old man shouldn't have needed permission for: a car repair, a vacation, the down payment on the house we eventually bought together, which Patricia had insisted on co-signing, a detail I hadn't fully understood the implications of until much later. "It's just easier this way," Adam told me once, when I asked why he didn't simply manage his own accounts. "She likes to feel involved. It's not worth the fight." I let it go. I told myself it wasn't my business, that every family had its own strange economy, that as long as our marriage stayed our own, the particulars of his relationship with his mother's checkbook didn't need to become my fight too. That detail seemed insignificant at the time. It wasn't. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning, 8 weeks along, standing in our bathroom holding a test I'd taken twice, just to be sure, my hands not quite steady. I called Maggie before I called anyone else, Maggie Doyle, my charge nurse and closest friend for almost a decade, the person who'd talked me through 2 breakups, 1 miscarriage scare of her own, and every difficult night shift either of us had ever survived. "You're going to be an incredible mother," she said, and then, more carefully, "How are you going to tell them?" "At Patricia's birthday," I said. "It feels right. A happy occasion, the whole family together." There was a pause on Maggie's end longer than the question warranted. "Just be careful with the timing, okay?" "I don't know. Something about that family makes me nervous, and I can't even tell you exactly why." I told her she was overthinking it. I told myself the same thing more than once, in the weeks that followed, every time something small and odd happened that I noticed and then quietly set aside. Patricia's questions about my work schedule grew more pointed, almost surveillance-like, as the pregnancy began to show. She asked, twice, in conversations that started about something else entirely, whether labor and delivery nurses got good benefits, a question that landed strangely each time, though I couldn't have told you why. I didn't yet know about the family group chat, 26 members, every Whitlock cousin and in-law included except, deliberately, me, or that 9 days before Patricia's birthday dinner, a conversation had already begun inside it, planning, in careful detail, exactly how the evening would unfold. The week before the dinner, I started noticing things I couldn't quite name yet, the specific, low-grade unease of watching a pattern form before you have enough pieces to see its full shape. Brooke called twice in 4 days, both times about nothing important, both times steering the conversation, almost too smoothly, toward questions about how Adam and I were doing financially. "Just checking in," she said the second time, her voice light in a way that didn't match the question underneath it. "You guys good? Money-wise, I mean. With the baby coming and everything." We're fine, Brooke, I said. Why do you ask? No reason, she said, too quickly. Just being a good sister-in-law. I noticed the quickness of it. I filed it away, the same way I'd filed away a dozen smaller things over the past 2 years, and went back to finishing the nursery wallpaper Adam and I had spent the weekend hanging. Gerald, my father-in-law, called me directly that same week, something he almost never did. Gerald has spent 4 decades being the quietest man in every room he's ever occupied, the kind of presence that registers more as weather than as a person with opinions of his own. Just wanted to see how you're feeling, he said, his voice careful in a way I hadn't heard from him before. Pregnancy and all. You doing okay? I'm doing great, Gerald. Excited. There was a pause, longer than the conversation needed. Good, he finally said. That's good. And then, almost as an afterthought, something that would only make sense to me months later, your mother-in-law's been a lot this week. Don't take anything she says too personally, whatever happens. I should have pushed. I didn't. I told myself Gerald was simply being Gerald, vague, conflict-averse, incapable of finishing a thought that might require him to take a side. I had no idea he was trying, in the only language he knew how to use, to warn me about something he didn't have the courage to name directly. I want to stop here for a second. Because if you've ever sensed something circling closer without being able to see its shape clearly, the specific unease of a family member's voice doing something you can't quite place, you already know what that week felt like. You don't always know what's coming. You just know, somewhere underneath the ordinary surface of things, that the air has started to change. Patricia's behavior in the days leading up to the dinner grew stranger by small degrees. She called me directly, twice, asking pointed questions about my work schedule and our household finances framed as innocent curiosity, how many hours I was picking up, whether Adam and I had discussed maternity leave, whether I'd looked into what happens financially if I needed to stop working for a while. Each question alone sounded almost reasonable. Strung together, they started to feel like something closer to an audit. I noticed her hands, too, the one time we were alone together that week, setting the table for a smaller family dinner, small, repetitive movements, straightening silverware that was already straight, refolding a napkin twice. Patricia had never once, in 2 years, struck me as a nervous woman. That night, something in her had come slightly loose, though I had no language yet for what I was watching. The night before the birthday dinner, I lay awake beside Adam, my hand resting against my stomach, running through the words I'd used to make our announcement. I thought about Patricia's strange questions, Brooke's odd phone calls, Gerald's careful warning, and told myself, the way I'd told myself all week, that I was reading too much into ordinary family noise. She told me, much later, Carol told me, months after everything, over coffee in her kitchen, what Patricia had actually been carrying that same night, lying awake in the house 2 miles from ours. This is what Carol said Patricia had told her. I kept thinking about Wendell. I know that sounds insane. My brother, gone 30 years now, married a woman who took half of everything he had before she disappeared with it. I watched my father's face the day he understood what had happened, and I promised myself, lying in bed that night, I would never let this family be that careless again. I told myself Harper's timing was too perfect, the pregnancy, the announcement at my birthday, all of it. I told myself I was simply protecting my son the way nobody protected my brother. I almost called Adam that night to ask him outright if he trusted her completely. I didn't. I told myself I'd watch, instead, and decide for myself what I was seeing. That's what Carol told me. I knew none of it yet, lying in my own bed 2 miles away, thinking only about how to say the words I'm having a baby to a room full of people I still, foolishly, wanted to love me. The dinner began the way every Whitlock event began, white linens, a string quartet Patricia had hired despite Gerald's quiet objection to the expense, 30 guests arranged at round tables across the country club terrace, the Blue Ridge foothills going purple behind us as the sun dropped. Adam squeezed my hand under the table as the appetizers cleared. "Ready?" he asked. I was ready. I had no idea what was actually waiting on the other side of that question. I want you to know that I didn't see it coming even in the final seconds, even as Patricia rose to make her toast, even as Adam stood beside me and said, simply, we have some news, even as I felt 30 pairs of eyes turn toward us with the easy, generous warmth of people expecting good news to be good news. What happened next is the part of the night I've replayed more times than I can count, trying to understand exactly which second the ground actually gave way. I know some of you already suspect where this is going. I didn't. Not until Patricia's face changed in a way I will never fully be able to describe, and the next thing I understood with any clarity was the cold iron of a terrace railing pressing into the small of my back. The fall itself happened faster than thought, the way real violence almost always does, no warning long enough to brace for, no moment where the body and mind agree on what's actually occurring until it's already over. Adam had just said we have some news, and I'd opened my mouth to say the words I'd rehearsed 100 times, I'm pregnant, when Patricia's voice cut across the terrace, louder than I'd ever heard it, sharp enough that the string quartet actually stopped mid-note. Don't, she said. Don't you dare stand there and lie to these people. I remember the confusion before the fear, the genuine, disoriented confusion of not understanding what I was being accused of. Patricia, I don't. 8 weeks, she said, and the number landed like something she'd been holding loaded for days. 8 weeks, conveniently, right as the trust review comes up. You think I haven't done the math, Harper? You think anyone in this family is fooled by the timing? 30 guests had gone completely still. I felt Adam beside me, his hand suddenly rigid in mine, and in the space where I expected him to speak, to simply say, Mom, that's insane, stop, there was instead a silence I would later learn, with painful precision, had lasted exactly 11 seconds. 11 seconds of my husband standing beside his mother's accusation, saying absolutely nothing, while 30 of her closest friends watched and waited to see which side of the family he'd choose. This baby is real, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I have an ultrasound in my purse, Patricia. I can show you right now. Show me, she said, stepping closer, close enough that I could see something underneath her fury that looked almost like fear. Show me, or admit you faked this whole thing to get access to money that was never going to be yours. I reached for my purse on the chair behind me, and that's the last clear, ordinary motion I remember before everything happened at once. Patricia's hand closed around my wrist, not gently, pulling instead of pushing at first, as though she meant to drag me toward the doors, toward some smaller, more private version of this confrontation. I pulled back. She didn't let go. And in the brief, ugly struggle that followed, 30 seconds, maybe less, that felt like minutes, I felt my own balance go, the terrace railing hitting the small of my back, and then nothing beneath me at all. The 10-foot fall ended on a gravel path below the terrace, and I don't remember the actual landing, only the after. Maggie was there within minutes. She'd come as my plus one, the only person in that whole family who'd actually wanted to be standing next to me. I remember her voice, sharp and clear and entirely professional, cutting through the chaos. Don't move her. I'm a nurse. Everyone back up. Somebody call an ambulance now. The hospital confirmed what I already suspected and was too afraid to say out loud: a broken wrist, 6 weeks in a cast, and a baby whose heartbeat the technician had to search for twice before finding it, steady, at 158 beats per minute. I lay on that exam table listening to that number with a kind of relief so total it left me shaking harder than the pain did. I documented everything from that first night forward, every text, every call, every detail Maggie helped me preserve with the careful, methodical instinct of someone who'd spent 12 years writing incident reports that needed to hold up under scrutiny. I photographed the bruising on my wrist before the swelling even peaked. I requested a copy of the hospital's own incident report. I called Joan Reyes the next morning, my voice flat with the particular calm that comes after shock rather than instead of it, and told her everything. The prenup is going to matter more than you think, Joan told me 3 days later after reviewing the case. If they try to claim financial motive, we have a signed, notarized document proving you waived any claim to that trust before the wedding even happened. That destroys their entire narrative in about 30 seconds. It was Brooke, 6 weeks after the fall, who handed us the second half of our case without meaning to. A routine notification, a wrong setting on a family thread she'd created years earlier, Harper Whitlock, added by mistake to a 26-member family group chat that had been running, unbroken, since before the dinner ever happened. I sat in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, my casted wrist propped on a pillow, scrolling through 9 days of messages that had begun, with chilling specificity, 9 days before Patricia's birthday, planning in detail exactly how the announcement would be intercepted, what accusations would be made, who would back Patricia up if things got difficult. I took screenshots of every message before the thread, predictably, vanished an hour later, scrubbed in a panic by someone, Brooke, we'd later confirm, who realized her mistake too late to undo its consequences. That detail seemed insignificant when I first noticed the group chat's existence months earlier, glimpsed once on Adam's phone screen and dismissed. It wasn't. It had been the architecture of the entire evening, built 9 days in advance, by people who had decided long before I ever opened my mouth to make an announcement that I would not be believed no matter what I said. I want to stop here, because some of you already know this feeling. The one where you finally hold proof of something you'd sensed all along, and instead of feeling triumphant, you feel a particular, hollow kind of grief, because some part of you had still been hoping, right up until that screenshot loaded, that you'd somehow gotten this family wrong. Carol called me the week after the group chat surfaced, her voice trembling in a way I hadn't expected. I need to tell you some things about Patricia, she said. About Wendell. I should have told you a long time ago. I let her talk. I didn't yet understand how much of what she said that night would matter. 6 months later, in a conference room neither of us could have imagined sitting in back when this had simply been a happy pregnancy and a birthday dinner. The settlement conference happened almost exactly 6 months after the fall, in a glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown Asheville office building, the Blue Ridge Mountains visible through the window behind Patricia's attorney's head. I was 32 weeks pregnant by then, my wrist long since healed, my divorce from Adam moving steadily through the courts alongside the criminal case the district attorney had decided, 3 months earlier, to pursue. Patricia believed, walking into that room, that she still controlled the outcome. She'd arrived with 2 attorneys, a folder of prepared talking points, and an offer $50,000, presented through her lawyer with the brisk efficiency of someone settling an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than answering for an assault, in exchange for my silence and the dropping of all charges. Gerald sat beside her, passive as always, his eyes fixed somewhere on the table. Brooke sat further down, unusually quiet, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. Adam had asked, through his own attorney, to be present. Joan Reyes didn't argue with the $50,000 offer. She simply slid a folder across the table and let it speak instead. My client respectfully declines, Joan said. But before we discuss why, I'd like to walk through what we have. She laid it out with the same calm, methodical precision I'd watched her use 100 times in smaller disputes, the hotel's surveillance footage, time-stamped, showing Patricia's hand closing around my wrist 11 seconds after Adam's silence. The hospital incident report, the photographs of bruising taken within hours of the fall, the fetal heart rate documentation from that night, 158 beats per minute, steady, undeniable. And then, last, the prenuptial agreement, dated 14 months before the wedding, eliminating entirely any financial claim I could ever have made on the Whitlock Trust. There is no financial motive here, Joan said, sliding the document across the table. My client signed away any claim to this family's money before she ever married into it. Whatever Mrs. Whitlock believed she was protecting that night, it wasn't $10 million from a daughter-in-law who'd already given up any right to it. Patricia's face, watching that document land in front of her, did something I'd never seen it do before, a flicker of genuine confusion, quickly buried beneath something colder. This doesn't change anything, she said. She still staged that fall. People do desperate things. The footage shows your hand on her wrist, Joan said. Not the other way around. She grabbed for her purse like she was performing for an audience, Patricia said, her voice climbing. Everyone there saw how dramatic she made it. 30 guests saw you scream the word lie at a pregnant woman before physically restraining her, Joan said, still calm, still even. We have statements from 6 of them already. I had said almost nothing yet, exactly as I'd planned with Joan beforehand. I sat with my hands folded over the curve of my stomach, watching Patricia's denial give way, in real time, to something messier. She turned to Adam, her voice sharpening into something closer to command than appeal. "Tell them," she said. "Tell them what really happened that night." Adam's silence stretched again, not 11 seconds this time, longer, his jaw working through something he clearly hadn't decided how to say out loud. "I don't think it happened the way you're describing it, Mom," he finally said, quietly, not quite looking at either of us. "I've never thought that. I just didn't know how to say it to your face." It wasn't an apology to me, not really. It was the first crack in Patricia's certainty that she could control this room the way she'd controlled every room in her life, and I watched her response to that crack ignite into something close to fury. "You're choosing her," Patricia said, rounding on her son. "After everything, you're sitting here choosing her over your own family." "I'm not choosing anyone," Adam said. "I'm just not lying for you anymore." Brooke broke next, faster and messier than I expected. "I deleted the messages," she said, suddenly, to the room rather than to anyone specific, her voice cracking. "After the chat got sent to Harper by mistake, I deleted everything that night. I panicked. I thought if it just disappeared it would be like none of it happened." "We have screenshots," Brooke, Jones said, gently enough that it landed almost like mercy. "All 9 days of planning. It's already with the district attorney's office." It was Carol who finally said the thing none of them had been willing to say in that room until then. She'd been sitting quietly at the far end of the table, and when she spoke, her voice carried the particular steadiness of someone who had decided, finally, that protecting a secret had stopped being worth its cost. "Patricia," she said, "tell them about Wendell. Tell them why you've spent 30 years terrified of exactly this. Maybe if they understand, it won't look quite so much like cruelty for its own sake." Something in Patricia finally gave way completely. "You want to understand," she said, her voice breaking apart into something raw I had never once heard from her in 2 years. "Fine. I'll tell you exactly why. My brother Wendell married a woman nobody trusted, against every warning our father gave him, and within 3 years she'd taken half of everything he had and disappeared. Money, property, our father's life's work, gone. Because Wendell refused to see what was right in front of him until it was too late to stop it. I watched my father age 10 years in the space of that single betrayal. I was 31 years old, and I promised myself, standing in that lawyer's office watching my father sign away half of everything he'd built, that I would never let this family be that careless again. Not with money. Not with trust. Not with anyone who came in claiming to love one of us. So when Adam brought Harper home, and then married her fast, and then announced a pregnancy at my own birthday dinner of all moments, I told myself I was simply doing what my father should have done for Wendell. I told myself the suspicion was love, that protecting this family's money was the same thing as protecting my son. I have spent 30 years confusing those two things so completely I genuinely don't know, standing here right now, where one stops and the other begins. I didn't plan to push her. I want that understood. I grabbed her wrist because some old, terrified part of me needed her to stop moving long enough for me to see clearly what I was looking at, and instead I created the exact kind of disaster I'd spent my entire life trying to prevent. I have not slept properly in 6 months. I keep hearing that sound. I don't think I know how to stop hearing it. I don't think I know, even now, whether I'm sorry for what I did to her or simply terrified of everything it's already cost me. The room had gone completely silent by the time she finished. Gerald, beside her, had begun, very quietly, to cry, the first emotion I had ever seen him show in 2 years of knowing him. The breaking of a man who had spent his entire marriage choosing silence over honesty and was only now beginning to understand what that silence had cost. I felt, watching Patricia's collapse, something I hadn't expected to feel, not triumph, not even relief, but a kind of exhausted, complicated sorrow for the woman she might have been if fear had never been allowed to calcify into cruelty. "I believe you," I finally said, the first thing I'd said directly to her in 6 months. "I believe almost all of that. But I'm not staying in this room to help you carry it, Patricia. I have a daughter to protect, and I've spent enough of this pregnancy protecting people who were never going to protect me back." The criminal case moved forward 3 weeks after that conference, the district attorney's office citing the surveillance footage, the medical documentation, and Brooke's recovered messages as more than sufficient grounds to proceed. Patricia was removed as trustee of the family fund within the month, a court-appointed fiduciary stepping into a role she had occupied and weaponized for over a decade. My divorce from Adam finalized 4 months later, quietly, without the drama I'd half expected given everything that came before it. He didn't fight for custody. "I know I don't deserve to ask you for anything," he told me, the last time we spoke as a married couple, sitting in Joan's office finalizing the paperwork. "I let 11 seconds of silence define the worst night of your life, and I don't think I've fully forgiven myself for that yet. I don't expect you to either." I told him I appreciated him saying it plainly. I didn't tell him it changed anything, because it didn't. Not the custody arrangement, not the divorce, not the year I'd lost believing his family's approval was worth chasing. I was granted sole custody of Ren, who arrived 7 weeks after that settlement conference, 6 pounds 9 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and a cry that the delivery nurse, not me, this time, someone else entirely, holding my hand instead of checking monitors, told me was the strongest set of lungs I've heard all year. I held my daughter in a hospital room 2 floors down from the one where I'd worked countless other women through this exact moment, and felt something settle in me that had been unsettled since the night of that terrace. Carol visits Rin every few weeks now, the only Whitlock I've let stay close. "I should have told you about Wendell 2 years ago," she said once, holding Rin while I made coffee in my own kitchen, in my own house, the one Patricia no longer has any financial claim over. "Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. But you deserve to know what you were walking into." I told her I appreciated that, and I meant it, though I've also come to understand that knowing earlier might not have changed my choices at all. That hope, the particular kind I'd been running on for 2 years, doesn't always respond to information the way caution would prefer it to. Maggie remains exactly what she's always been, the person who shows up, who held my hand through delivery, who sat beside me through every court date neither of us wanted to be at. "You did this," she told me, the day the criminal case finally concluded with Patricia's plea agreement. "All of it, on your own evidence, your own documentation, your own clear head. Even when everyone around you wanted you to doubt what you'd seen with your own eyes." I think about that birthday dinner often. The version of myself standing on that terrace believing good news, delivered honestly, could fix almost anything. I don't believe that anymore, not in the uncomplicated way I once did. What I believe now is steadier and harder one, that some people's fear has calcified into something no amount of honesty can soften, and that recognizing the difference between people who simply need time and people who will never actually change is its own kind of hard-earned wisdom. I held Ren on our porch the week we brought her home, the Blue Ridge Mountains turning gold the way they do every October, and felt, for the first time in longer than I could measure, completely unafraid of what came next. What makes Patricia difficult to simply call a villain is the same thing that makes her dangerous. Her cruelty was never random. It was load-bearing, built across 30 years on top of a single unresolved trauma she never let herself examine closely enough to separate from the love she genuinely believed she was offering her son. Wendell's betrayal didn't make her suspicious of Harper specifically. It made her suspicious of trust itself, and Harper simply had the misfortune of arriving, ring in hand, into a family system that had already decided, decades before she existed, that anyone who loved a Whitlock was a threat until proven otherwise. The deeper failure in this story belongs to Adam, though, more than it belongs to his mother. Patricia's fear was at least explicable, inherited, traumatic, comprehensible even where it was indefensible. Adam's 11 seconds of silence on that terrace had no such excuse behind them. He wasn't protecting a wound from decades earlier. He was simply choosing, in the most consequential moment of his marriage, the comfort of his mother's approval over the safety of his pregnant wife, and that choice, more than any single accusation Patricia made, is what actually ended that marriage. Money didn't break this family. A son's willingness to stay silent while his mother's hands closed around his wife's wrist did. There's a harder truth sitting underneath the surveillance footage and the prenuptial agreement and all the careful evidence Harper gathered, though, and it has less to do with Patricia or Adam than with what it cost Harper to keep hoping for as long as she did. Her instinct toward good faith, The belief that honesty, delivered kindly, could eventually earn safety wasn't weakness. It was simply the wrong tool for a family that had already decided, long before she arrived, that suspicion was the only currency that kept their money safe. The lesson this story leaves behind isn't that hope is foolish. It's that hope without evidence is a gift you give people, and some people will never have earned the right to receive it. Knowing the difference, and knowing it early enough to protect yourself anyway, might be the single hardest skill any of us ever has to learn. I think about Gerald most, out of everyone in that story, a man who spent 4 decades choosing silence over honesty, and who only found his voice the moment it was far too late to matter to anyone but himself. That's the part of this story that lingers longest for me. How many people stand quietly beside real harm, telling themselves that staying neutral is the same thing as staying kind? If you've ever waited for a family to finally choose you back, if you've ever mistaken someone's fear for love because the alternative felt too lonely to sit with, I hope some part of Harper's clarity reaches you the way it eventually reached her. You're allowed to stop waiting for people to become safe. You're allowed to build the proof yourself and walk away regardless of what they decide to do with it. If there's someone in your life who taught you that love sometimes wears the face of suspicion, tell me one word for them in the comments. I read every one. And thank you, truly, for sitting with this story until the end. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it felt like exactly the right one to finally say out loud.